Let's go. Let's go. Hello. How you doing? As you guys come in, let me know if you can hear me. Let me know if you guys can hear me on this one. I'm doing excellent. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Yeah, okay, good. You can hear me good? Good. Yeah, I promised last week I promised that I would get a new microphone because I got tired of the technical issues. I wanted you guys to hear me. So I got a new pod microphone. I moved my workspace to a better spot where I can get better reception. So I think we're ready to rock and roll tonight. From Melbourne. Melbourne, isn't that Australia? Melbourne? All right, the favorite diva. Welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, glad you're reaching all the way out here, Astrid. I appreciate you being here tonight. Peace and blessings to everyone. Peace and blessings. All right. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about ways that we can change ourselves, let go of the past, and we're going to also discuss the reasons why it's so hard for us to change. The reasons why we reach these certain levels in our lives and it's so difficult to transition from the old version of who we are to the new version of who we need to be or who we want to become. We kind of get stuck. I know for a fact, in my own personal life, making certain changes was extremely difficult. It was always a struggle to make changes, except for when there was a natural disaster or a personal crisis. Then you're kind of forced to change. But we don't always want to have to be in a position where things are falling apart and we're in a state of disarray in order to change our lives. Sometimes you want to change your life in a moment before the disaster strikes. You want to change your life in a moment when things are going well. Sometimes it's good to change when things are going well so you can make things even better for yourself, or change in order to prevent things from falling apart. But it's hard to do that. Even in myself, in my personal life, I had something happen and I had an opportunity to fix the problem before there was even a problem. But the old me that I was stuck in would not even let me do it for some odd reason. And I had to stop and think about it. That was kind of the manifestation of where this little presentation came from. So I'm glad you all showed up here tonight. I really want this to be our time for our weekly presentation. So if you guys want, I'll stick to this time. Wednesday nights, 11:11. I like that number. They say that number is magical. So we can work with that. Every Wednesday night, we'll just meet here and we'll chop it up. So I thought about it long and hard, had to look at myself, and I realized there's multiple reasons why we have a hard time changing. And those reasons are ego and identity. And this is what I came up with for identity. Identity is who we think we are. Notice I said who we think we are because we have our own perceptions of who we are, and other people might see us differently, but ego is pretty much our own perception of who we are. And the unfortunate thing about it is that our identity is something that many of us don't create. Now, when you master the ability to change, that's when you can kind of create your own identity at will and make the proper changes and become who you need to become. When you read ancient texts, quite often it says that, the original God, the original being in the universe is self-created. When you tap into your divinity, you become a being that's able to self-create. But many of us are born as just receptacles. We are born as blank slates, so to speak, and we're receptacles for sensory information, for environmental information. We're receptacles for cues from our parents. So we're just drinking all of this in from the moment we're born all the way up until we die. We pretty much are consuming constant stimulation from our environment that shapes us. And quite often, I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, which is a pretty tough environment. And I see so many people around me, so many of my brothers and sisters who become a reflection of the environment. They become forced to think and behave in a certain way because they don't realize that they actually have the power within them to self-create. It's never been taught to them. The practice of self-creation has never been taught to them. So their identity simply becomes a reflection of what's happening in the environment. So there's violence in the environment. They become violent. If there's abuse, they become abusive. If there's drugs, they become drug addicts. If there's alcohol, they become, addicted to alcohol. You drink all of this in. You remain in a baby state, constantly drinking all of this in. And the unfortunate thing about it is that we get stuck thinking that this is who we are. This is not who you are. This is Hartford. Or if you're a person who was born and raised in the suburbs, you're not who you are. You're that environment. You become a reflection of who you grew up in, whether it's the city or, a rural environment, whether it's somewhere poor, somewhere with money. You just become a mirror for that world without looking within yourself and developing the capacity to self-create. Also, something else that happens to us is we go through trauma, and everybody goes through trauma, right? No matter who you are, no matter how safe your environment is, you might lose a loved one. You might end up in a car accident that traumatizes you. We have individuals who might go to war to fight for their country and they come back traumatized, right? Because we are the result of our environment, what happens is that the trauma becomes our very identity. When you get traumatized, your trauma becomes who you think you are. So if you're a person who has been abused, well, I'm the guy who's been abused when I was a kid. So all my behavior is the result of that abuse. My whole identity becomes the trauma. When I was a person who was going through depression because of what I went through as a kid, I was Devin, the guy who drank all the time because I was going through depression. So that depression became who I was. I used to write songs, hip hop songs with my friends. My songs were always sad and about how depressed I was and how I needed to drink to ease my stress. That became my whole self. So when people saw me, it was, oh, there's Devin, and he has a bottle of rum with him. So predictable. My whole identity was based upon the trauma and the resulting behaviors of the trauma of what I endured as a child. And the same thing happens with many of us. If you're in a relationship and you get cheated on, then that person who got cheated on becomes your whole identity. Your whole self-concept is based upon the trauma of being betrayed in a relationship. Or you lose the loved one. So your whole identity is based upon the loss of that loved one. So the decisions that you make, how you interact with other people, whether or not you can control your emotions, your attachment style, all become the result of the trauma. So you think the trauma is you. Without realizing it, quite often we think the trauma is who we are. Instead of realizing that the trauma is something that happened, yes, it's a part of our experience, but it doesn't have to entirely be who you are. And we get stuck in that. And what is it that's keeping us stuck? What's keeping us stuck in this identity? Well, what's keeping us stuck is ego. Now, I know there's a lot of different definitions of ego. I was reading this one psychological article that said that ego, yeah, Roger, exactly, fear of change. That's what keeps us stuck. And the ego is the thing, the force that's fearing change. Ego is defined in the psychological article that I was reading as a resource. It's a resource in the body that kind of drives your behavior. And I wrote down, kind of definition that I came up with from what I've read and what I've seen. An ego is a psychological resource that creates attachment to identity and uses identity as a program for executive function. Fancy words, but essentially what it means is that your ego is what keeps you attached to your identity. Imagine you with a chain on your wrist and you're chained to a rock. Well, your ego is the chain. The rock is your identity. And your identity or your ego will use the identity to protect itself. Your ego is not trying to let go of that identity. So your ego will do whatever it possibly can to fight. It will do whatever it possibly can to stay alive. The ego is like a separate organism in and of itself. And any organism threatened with harm is going to fight back. And your identity is an organism as well. It's going to fight. Your ego and your identity are going to fight to stay alive. The ego is not going out without a fight, and neither is your identity. So when the part of you that is aware of these things wants to make change, wants to become self-created, you have a battle ahead of you. Your ego is not a weakling. Your ego is not some being that's gonna just give up and say, okay, you know what? I've worn out my welcome. Time to go home, everybody. And the ego is consistently, good point, Roger H. The ego is consistently fighting to protect and defend the identity, and the identity is trying to protect the ego. And neither one of them want to submit. Neither one of them want to move on. So they create this intense sense of reality. How do they create a sense of reality? By affecting your body. Your ego and your identity becomes so much a part of who you are. It gets embedded in your muscle memory. It gets embedded in your neural structure. It gets embedded in your eating patterns. So if you're a depressed person and you eat, for the sake of dealing with depression, yep, they are in a constant battle, favorite diva. And the thing about it is, they get so embedded in who we are, so embedded in our daily routines. If you eat because of discomfort or anxiety, then you just become that person who eats because you're uncomfortable. My younger brother, when we were younger, he had this thing that he would do. He would tell a joke and then start dancing. And he was such a happy person. He would just tell a joke and then start dancing and moving around. So that became a part of his identity because that was a part of his muscle memory, just to dance when other people were laughing. That's a part of who he became. So his identity and his ego was embedded in his body, in his very body. And the same thing happens with us, and it especially happens with trauma. Sometimes you might hear a loud sound. Some people hear a loud sound, they're so used to it, they don't even care. Other people hear a loud sound and they jump and they're afraid because that trauma has taken over their muscle memory, has taken over the function of their central nervous system. So your identity has commandeered all of this. Ego has commandeered all of this. So it's a struggle to even become aware of your own actions enough to be able to be aware that you can change. And it's a constant and consistent battle. Constant and consistent battle. But knowing this, and I consistently try my best to look back at ancient civilizations and saw how they handled these things. And I realized that ego makes us attached to our identity. We have to let go. How do we let go? How do we detach ourselves from this? Well, the ancients, they used ritual. And there's a very important ritual that you consistently see throughout, religions all over the world and spiritual systems all over the world, which is the ritual of the resurrection. These resurrection rituals were consistently acted out by ancient people, and we still see the results of these resurrection rituals in religions all over the world. Now, before we get into this discussion, I just want to say that I respect all people's perspective. I don't disrespect anybody's worldview or religious views. So my analysis of these religious rituals is just that. I look at religion and I try to self-apply what I find in religion and bring it into my spiritual system. I don't follow a religion, but I do believe that studying religion and taking out what you can, take the best part and utilize it in your personal life, that makes it more real. It's not real to me if you just go into a church or a mosque or a synagogue and it's just a practice. It has to be something that you live and take within yourself in order to improve your life. So this is just my analysis of what I've gotten from the religions that I've studied and the spiritual systems that I've studied, how I've benefited. And if I can hand something to you guys, that would make me extremely happy. And I also want to take a moment to say all of this information, all of this knowledge belongs to the entire world. It's for free. However, donations are very much appreciated. Anybody who can throw something in the pot, absolutely appreciate it, but you don't have to. But just feel free to if the mood hits you, the spirit moves you, I appreciate your donations. Now let's continue. Let's start with ancient Kemet, what people call or refer to as Egypt. Now, the original name for Egypt, the name Egypt actually is a Greek name. The original name for Egypt was, or one of the original names for Egypt was Kemet. Kemet was a place where there was a tremendous amount of, it was an empire that lasted for thousands of years. So they had so much time to advance the civilization, have advanced mathematics, and an advanced, very complicated spiritual system. And they had spiritual systems arrive and then go. They had monotheism with the pharaoh Akhenaten, who, some conspiracy theorists say Akhenaten was Moses because they lived around the same time and they both were monotheists. The story of Moses is very similar to the story of Akhenaten, but that's a whole separate presentation I can go into. But in Kemet, one of the gods that they believed in was a god called Asar. Now, Asar was an individual who was a ruler. He was a ruler of the land of Egypt after it was united. And Asar was betrayed and killed by his brother Set, who the Greeks call Seth. And the Greeks also referred to Asar as Osiris. Now, Asar was killed by his brother Set. His body was chopped up and mutilated into 12 pieces. The number 12, keep track of these numbers I'm throwing at you guys. The number 12, he was chopped up into 12 pieces, and all 12 pieces were scattered throughout the land so that his body wouldn't be able to be put together. Because in Egypt at that time, in Kemet at that time, to have your body unburied was not only perilous because your flesh would be eaten by animals in the desert and animals in the wilderness. Hey, Gail, how you doing? not only be devoured by animals in the wilderness, but your spirit would roam and be dissatisfied and unable to go into the afterworld unless it had proper burial and things of that nature. So when Asar was killed, his wife Aset, who the Greeks called Isis, she was his queen. She mourned him so greatly and was so distraught. Gail, thank you very much. She was so distraught over the loss of her man that she gathered all of the pieces of his body, laid him down, put his body back together, said magic utterances over him, and invited a god called Thoth, who his original name was Tahuti. The Greeks called him Thoth. The god Thoth, his name pretty much is where we derive the word thought from. Thoth was the god of wisdom. He was the god of words, the god of language, the god of mathematical calculations. He was pretty much the god of intelligence. And Thoth, or Tahuti, came over to where Asar had been laid down, opened his mouth and spoke words into his mouth, and more or less breathed the breath of life back into Asar. And what happened? Asar was resurrected. And this is a ritual that was performed in Kemet on a regular basis, symbolizing the need for change through death of the old and resurrection of the new. You ascend to higher levels, just like Asar did. When Asar was resurrected, what happened to him? He became the ruler of the underworld. He went from being a king in our world to becoming a ruler of the underworld and tapped into his own divinity through the process of death and then resurrection. Let's look at India. In India, you have the god Krishna. Now, Krishna is the incarnation of the god Vishnu. And Krishna was a god who was very interesting because he was sort of a god that don't fit in with our definition of God in the Western world. He was a god who was playful, and he was a trickster, and he was humorous, and he was a ladies' man, but he was believed to be divine. He was most famous for being in a book called the Bhagavad Gita. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, he was the charioteer to the ruler of a particular kingdom over in India named Arjuna. The entire book is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, where Krishna has to convince Arjuna to fight a war against his own family in order to preserve the kingdom. The story of Krishna pretty much ends where someone curses him, and Krishna is killed by his very own friend, a man by the name of Jara. When Krishna is killed, he immediately ascends outside of his body and returns to a location called Devaloka, which means the place of the gods, the location of the gods. As soon as he went back there, he ascended to a higher level amongst all of the gods. Even the god Indra, who was considered one of the most powerful gods, had to pay obeisance to him. He had to die in order to ascend. Once again, giving you that symbolism of how you need to let go of the physical flesh by changing. Because in essence, when you change yourself, you change your body, you change your DNA. You change your mind in a powerful enough level, you can change your body. You can literally change your health simply by changing your thought process. Trust me, I'm talking from personal experience. I remember back when I was going through serious depression and my blood pressure being through the roof and diabetes out of whack. I remember how many times I almost died because I couldn't control my blood sugar because I was so focused on depression. It was killing my body. Then I changed my mind when I began to meditate, and I became resurrected. And I went to the doctor after I had been meditating for about a year or so, and they couldn't believe it. They were like, I don't know what you're doing, just keep doing it. A1C was down, body was more healthy. I had lost a bunch of weight. I was lean and mean. I was looking good. I mean, I've always been a bulky guy. I've never been thin. But, I went from 200 some odd pounds to like 220 some odd pounds. I think the lowest that I've been in my adult life is 208 pounds. I think God just wants me to be big. I don't know. I'll blame it on the universe. But yeah, changing your thoughts allows you to free yourself up. You become resurrected. I'm back from the dead simply because I began a process of mindfulness. Yes, mindset shift. That usually leads to healing. And that's a major part of it. You cannot heal if you remain the same. And that's, once again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about trauma. You think your identity becomes formed simply by your trauma. You form your whole self around trauma. But once you allow yourself to let all of that go, you're resurrected. You're brought back. Now, this is another interesting story. This is another resurrection ritual that I liked a lot. This is from Norse mythology. Now, when I was a kid, I was a mythology head. I used to study mythology from all over the world, and who would have thought as an adult I began to see the deeper symbolism in a lot of this stuff. Now, if you've ever seen the Thor films, Thor Ragnarok and the Avengers films, you know that there's a god called Thor, right? His father was called Odin. Odin was the chief of all of the gods. He was the reigning lord of all the gods and the place called Asgard. Now, even though he was a god, he was not all-knowing. He was always seeking wisdom and wandering the world for more knowledge. And he came to a place that was the well of wisdom. Now, in the well of wisdom, oh, thank you very much, Astrid. In the well of wisdom, there was a being called Mimir. Mimir was sort of dark and mysterious, didn't speak a whole lot. And Odin went to Mimir and said, listen, I know you got this well. I know if I take a sip of those waters, I'm going to be imbued with a tremendous amount of wisdom. Give me a cup. He said, give me a cup of that water, bro. You can't hold that. I need that water, bro. Thank you very much, Carly. I appreciate that. So he said, I need a cup of that water, bro. What we got to do? We got to work something out. You got to give me a cup of that wisdom water. I need that wisdom water, man. And Mimir thought about it. And he said, nah, you know what? I'm not giving you my water. He said, you want some of this water? We got to trade something. So Odin said, I'll give you whatever you want. And Mimir wanted to test him. He wanted to test him. So he said, hey, listen, you really want this wisdom water? Odin said, of course I do. Give me your eye. And without a single moment of hesitation, Odin pulled his eye right out and gave it to Mimir and said, here you go. And he got that cup of water from the wisdom well and drank it and became the wisest of all the gods. Right? So he gave a piece of himself to gain wisdom. And we all must do that. But let's take it a step further. Odin is so dedicated to wisdom and learning and self-development. He was in Asgard, which is the heavens. Now, the heavens sit on top of this thing called Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is the world tree. So there's these big branches, right, that are pretty much the universe. And on all the branches of the world tree, there are 9 different worlds, 9 different realms. There's the realm of the gods, the realm of the giants, the realm of the ogres, and other unseen spiritual realms, right? Odin is way up in heaven, but he's nosy. He's looking down. As he's looking down, you see these 3 goddesses called the Norns, and they're carving these runes onto a tree. Now, runes are pretty much just the letters of the language that they used at that time. And he saw what they were carving, and he knew that in those runes, there's the secret of the fate of the universe and the secrets of creation right there, but he couldn't read them. So just to get that knowledge, he came down out of heaven. He hung himself from the world tree. He took a massive spear and stabbed himself. And when the gods rushed down to help him, like, Father, let us help you, let us save you. He said, no, back away, let this happen. And he hung from the side of the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights. And just as he was dying, and some versions of the story he died, some versions of the story he came close to death. But just as he was dying, he looked at the runes and he understood perfectly what they meant. He understood perfectly what the fate of the world was, where he fit in with the world, and what he had to do. What he had to do and what his purpose was, what his fate was. And there's a famous line from a poem written about that incident where the line says, I sacrificed myself to myself. That's what Odin did. He sacrificed himself to himself in order to achieve the goal of attaining wisdom. And that's what we all must do. We all must begin the process of sacrificing ourselves to ourselves, because you're not going to achieve higher level. You're not going to achieve a better life without sacrifice. You're not going to move forward if you're still holding on to all this baggage from the past. You're not going to be able to break free if you're holding on to the bars of your own prison. And the bars of your own prison is your illusory identity, because who you think you are is really just the result of other people's decisions, other people's influence on the culture, TV, radio, reality TV, novels, movies. All of that is the totality of who you are until you break free and self-create. Once you self-create, then you become who you're truly meant to be. But that is only going to happen once you kill the old you. I had to kill the old me. And I'm going through a process of self-development. I'm realizing, wow, I'm glad I got rid of that guy. Nice guy, but completely nuts. Sweethearted guy, but Jesus, he was a walking wreck. As good as that guy was, I'm much better now. I'm much more mature now. I'm much healthier now. And truth be told, not to brag or boast, I'm much better looking now too. I look a lot better as a guy who only takes a sip of wine once in a while than I did when I was a walking wreck drinking a fifth of scotch a day. I can tell you that much right now. So the honest truth of the matter is, Destroy the old self. Stop holding on to the old self. Stop being afraid. Understand who you are. Look within yourself and understand your triggers so that you can evolve and go beyond what you are. Because who you are now is just the result of everybody else. Think about it. How often do you want to do something but you don't because you're afraid of how other people are going to react? That's them creating you. How often do you want to make a particular move but you hear your mom's voice or your brother's voice or your cousin's voice or your ex-wife's voice or somebody else's voice telling you can't do it? And you say, I should just stop. I probably shouldn't do it. You are essentially allowing the world around you to make you who you are and not self-creating. How do you ascend and let go, break free? You self-create. Let that old self die. And don't be afraid of that word. Favorite Diva, thank you for your kind words. Thank you so much. Let that old self die. That old self might have been somebody you developed a great relationship with. That old self might be a great friend. That old self, that old identity, but it's like an old comfortable blanket. You know, and I'm the king of old comfortable blankets, old comfortable coats, old comfortable shoes. I mean, if I showed you some of the shoes I got laying around here, I had them so long, they're not even shoes anymore. But eventually it gets to the point where you say, okay, let's stop walking around with these beat up half flip-flops on and toss them out. I deserve better than to walk around with some shoes that with no bottoms. Let go of the old self. Let go of those old shoes. Let go of that fuzzy old blanket that's all tattered and messed up. Your old identity, you know, God bless it, it served its purpose, but it's just an illusion that you wear to keep yourself safe from your own power. You're keeping yourself safe from your own true nature because it's scary. You look at the symbology of the Bible. What happened in the Bible? When the Israelites left Egypt, when the Israelites left Egypt and were no longer being ruled over by Pharaoh, they had to go into the wilderness, which was so hard and so difficult. They were stuck out there for 40 years trying to build a nation. And that's symbolic to the amount of difficulty that it takes for us to put ourselves out there and go through the process of trying to build something. Remember, just see the symbology as yourself. You are the temple. You are Israel. You are the Israelites. See that. See yourself as a part of that story and understand that what it really means is it takes a long time for you to build yourself up. And that brings us to the ultimate story of self-sacrifice, the story of Jesus Christ. Once again, if there's anybody in the room who's religious, this is no disrespect, but we're just going to analyze it from a more esoteric perspective. So just bear with me for a second. Now, Christ is the ultimate resurrection ritual, ultimate resurrection story. Christ was 30 years old when he began his ministry. He taught for 3 years and was crucified at 33. Look at these numbers. Remember these numbers. These numbers have symbolic significance. Why is 3 important? 3 is a number that symbolizes completion. Once you reach a certain phase in your life, you complete that phase and you move on. You'll notice that in your own personal life, quite often, these stages of personal development, they kind of are divisible by the number 3. When you're 18 years old, that's a certain level of development. You know, you're close to being an adult. 21 years old, then you hit like 24. When you hit 24, you start moving on and start, you know, trying to get a career and not just a job. You're making moves, going to college. 30, that's that's another really significant number in your personal development. 45, another number that's very significant in your personal development. So that number 3 kind of symbolizes moving on to the next phase and the next stage. How many times did the Apostle Peter deny Jesus Christ? 3 times. How many days was Jesus Christ in the tomb before he was resurrected and they moved away the stones? 3 days. That number 3 has always had significance throughout ancient cultures. In Hinduism, that number 3 appears when you look at the chief Hindu gods. The chief Hindu gods are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the sustainer of the universe, and Shiva, who's the destroyer of the universe. So that number 3, there it goes again. Last week I talked about the Yoruba religion of Ifa. In Ifa, same 3. There are 3 manifestations of the supreme force of the universe. There is Olodumare, who was the creator of the universe. Olorun, the ruler of the universe. And Olifi, the bridge between Orun, which is heaven, and Aye, which is earth. That's the 3 manifestations of the supreme being. In ancient Kemet, there's something called the Aeneid. The Aeneid is a group of 9 gods. Those 9 gods are Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. 9 is important because it takes 9 months for a child to be born. So that number 9 once again goes back to completion, but 9 is divisible by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. See the symbology. Also look at, they say in order to become a master teacher, you need 360 degrees of knowledge. 360 degrees divided by 3 is 120 degrees. 120 degrees is divisible by 3 as well. Look at in Freemasonry, they say you have to be 33 degrees into Freemasonry to become a master mason. You got 33 vertebrae in your spine. So that number 3 and 3, that number 3 is highly important. It's always been highly important throughout ancient culture. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, see, that number 3 is going to keep popping up. It's significant. You can't get rid of that number, Carly. All right, so once again, we go back to the importance of that number 3. 3 is completion. Once you reach a certain completion, even when Christ spoke, you ever notice sometimes in the Bible he would, death seemed to happen in 3s. And you ever notice when Christ was speaking the Bible, sometimes he would repeat things 3 times. He would say, verily, 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 I say unto you. That number 3 is highly symbolic and highly powerful. So once again, once you reach a certain stage in your life and it's time to move on, that number 3 is going to keep popping up. And you're going to notice either you're going to move on willingly or life is going to take its boot and shove it in your backside. So it's good to understand that it's time to let the old self go. Let the old self, just let it die. Sacrifice it so you can move forward to the future. You can only move forward to the future once you let go of the old self. Your old identity has served its purpose, but it needs to grow. We can't get too attached to who we think we are because you're going to look back 10 years from now and you ain't going to even recognize who you are. And the sad part is, this is the sad part. The sad part is that there are some people who can look back 10 years and they're the same person. I got people who brag about that. I'm the same dude I was since high school. Like, you are? How'd you manage to pull that off and survive out here? That is insane that some people consider that to be a good thing. So, and I'm not going to conclude, but I do want us to take a moment to meditate. But we're going to meditate a little bit differently. I'm going to guide you guys in meditation. But I feel so good. You see, I'm sweating. I feel so good that I'm going to guide you. I'm going to guide you guys in the meditation. But I actually wrote a meditation song. And I want you guys to visualize something while I attempt to give you a vocalization of what I wrote. And this is something I started writing, I think, like a year ago. I wrote the first part like a year ago. And then as I was preparing for this, these other lyrics came to me, and I said I should use that for the meditation, and we can consider this sort of a resurrection ritual. How can we overcome when the old self, thoughts and habits keep coming up in the present? Well, the best way to do it is to be aware of it, and it's a minute by minute struggle. You know, I used to always say that when I first began meditation because I realized the same thing. It's hard to change. And there would be days where, you know, I would have to literally fight my own mind minute by minute. Of course, it got much easier once I retrained my mind. But, you know, they say it's a day by day fight to change. No,